At the will reading, they laughed when I got $1. The room was full of smirks, until the lawyer cleared his throat. And now, about the Swiss account only David can access. Silence. I'm David Mitchell, I'm 32 years old, and at my grandmother's will reading, my own family laughed in my face when I inherited just one single dollar. Before I tell you how that $1 led me to an $8 million Swiss bank account and gave me complete control over my family's entire fortune, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. The air in the lawyer's office was thick and heavy, smelling of old paper and the expensive, polished wood of the conference table. Felt like a tomb. I sat silently, trying to make myself as small as possible, my shoulders hunched. Across from me, my younger brother, Tyler, couldn't stop jiggling his leg, a smug little smirk playing on his lips that he wasn't even trying to hide. My father sat at the head of the table like a king on his throne, checking his watch, looking impatient, as if this whole process of honoring his dead mother's last wishes was an inconvenience getting in the way of his afternoon golf game. And my mother, she sat beside me, her hand resting on my arm. Every few moments she'd give it a little squeeze, her face a mask of pity that felt more insulting than any slap. Mr. Harrison, my grandmother Maggie's lawyer for over 40 years, cleared his throat. He was a kind, weary-looking man in his late 60s, with tired eyes that had seen far too many family dramas play out in this very room. "All right," he began, his voice raspy with age. "We'll start with the smaller bequests." He droned on, reading through a few minor items for distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. A set of china here, a small painting there. Then he got to the main event, the part my family had been waiting for. "To my beloved younger grandson, Tyler Mitchell." He read, and Tyler sat up straighter, his smirk widening into a full-blown, triumphant grin. "I leave my cottage in Bend, Oregon, my 2018 Subaru Outback, and the entirety of my savings account, which currently holds a balance of $12,451. My father clapped Tyler on the back, a loud, booming sound that made me flinch. "Well done, son." She knew who her real boy was. My mother beamed, her eyes sparkling. "Oh, Tyler, she always adored you so much. You were the light of her life." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a cold, heavy weight settling in my stomach. It wasn't surprise. I had learned long ago not to expect anything. It was just the official, legally binding confirmation of a lifetime of feeling invisible. Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, the fluorescent lights glinting off the lenses. He looked down at the last page of the will, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his expression. Pity? Apology. It was gone before I could be sure. "And to my elder grandson, David Mitchell." The room went quiet. I could feel their eyes on me, 3 pairs of them, burning into my skin, all of them anticipating the punchline to a joke I'd been living my whole life. "I leave the sum of $1. Tyler burst out laughing. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a loud, ugly, braying laugh that echoed in the silent, wood-paneled room. My father shook his head with a condescending grin, and my mother gave my arm another one of her pathetic, pitying squeezes as if to say, "Oh, you poor, sweet, disappointing thing." "And," Mr. Harrison continued, his voice steady and calm, refusing to be interrupted by Tyler's diminishing giggles, "I also leave David my collection of vintage recipe cards, which he always seemed to appreciate more than anyone else." That was it. $1 and a box of old, grease-stained cards. "Well, that's that," my father said, standing up and stretching his arms over his head as if he'd just finished a long, boring meeting. "Let's go, everyone. Tyler, you've got some paperwork to sign for the car and the house." They practically swaggered out of the room, Tyler already on his phone, loudly telling one of his friends about the insane party he was going to throw at his new cottage. I just sat there, frozen, the sound of their laughter still ringing in my ears, a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. As the door clicked shut, plunging the room into silence, Mr. Harrison looked at me, and his professional mask finally fell away. His expression was soft with a deep, genuine sympathy. Mr. Mitchell, David, please have a seat. Don't go just yet. I looked up at him, my mind a fog of humiliation and grief. Why? It's over. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a conspiratorial tone that sent a jolt through my stupor. The public reading is concluded, and now, we need to discuss the Swiss account that only you can access. The words hung in the air, completely nonsensical. Swiss account? Me? For a moment, I was sure I'd misheard him, that the cumulative weight of the humiliation had finally made my brain short-circuit. But Mr. Harrison's expression was dead serious. He wasn't joking. Before we get to that conversation, though, and what it meant for my entire future, you need to understand why getting just $1 in that moment felt so normal. It was the logical, predictable conclusion to a story that had been written since the day I was born. My entire life had been a masterclass in being the supporting actor in my own story. My life has been a long, painful series of moments that proved I was the runner-up in a two-man race. It wasn't just about money or gifts. It was about worth, about visibility, about the allocation of love and attention. My parents didn't see my quiet, steady nature as a strength. To them, it was a lack of ambition, a failure of personality. I was predictable, reliable, and therefore boring. Tyler, on the other hand, was all flash and charm. He was impulsive, exciting, and unpredictable. He could talk his way out of any trouble and into any opportunity. He was the golden boy, and I was the responsible, ever-present shadow he cast. I remember when I was 14, for the school science fair. The theme was sustainability. I was genuinely excited. I spent 2 months meticulously building a working model of a sustainable greywater irrigation system for a home garden. It was complex, with a small pump I'd saved up for by doing chores, tubing I'd repurposed from old projects, and a multi-stage filtration system using sand and charcoal. I was incredibly proud of it. I'd sketched out the plans, done the research on filtration mediums, and built it piece by piece in our garage. The night before it was due, Tyler, who was 12, came to me in a full-blown panic. His project was supposed to be a solar oven, but he'd spent the week playing video games and all he had was a cardboard box sloppily lined with aluminum foil. It wouldn't have heated a glass of water on the sun. He begged me to help, tears in his eyes, telling me he was going to fail the class and my parents would kill him. So I did what I always did. I took over. I pushed my own project, the culmination of 2 months of work, into the corner. I stayed up with him until 3 a.m., rebuilding his box, calculating the correct angles for the reflector flaps, and finding a way to properly insulate it. The next day, at the fair, Tyler's solar oven actually worked. It melted chocolate for s'mores, and kids and parents crowded around his table. My irrigation system, which was quietly and perfectly doing its job in a neglected corner, drew barely a glance. My parents stood there, beaming with a pride so intense it was almost blinding. "That's my boy," my dad boomed, ruffling Tyler's hair. "A regular boy genius. So resourceful. So creative." My mother looked over at my irrigation system. "That's nice, David," she said, her eyes already drifting back to Tyler's s'mores making show. "A little complicated, though, isn't it? A bit plain." They never once asked if I'd helped him. They just assumed brilliance from him and competence from me. Brilliance gets applause. Competence gets a nod and is quickly forgotten. It was the same with everything. Christmas when I was 16. I'd been saving for months for a professional-grade camera lens. I wasn't just a hobbyist. I was passionate about photography. I joined the school photo club, and my work had even been featured in the local paper. I'd circled the lens in catalogs, read reviews, and talked about it constantly. I was sure it was what I was getting. On Christmas morning, I tore open my big gift from my parents. It was a very sensible, very boring collection of sweaters and dress shirts for college interviews. "You need to look the part for your future, David," my father said sagely. "Image is everything." Then Tyler opened his. It was a brand new, top-of-the-line gaming computer, something he'd mentioned wanting maybe once or twice. Cost 10 times what my lens would have. "Wow, no way," he shouted, jumping up and down. My parents just laughed, thrilled with his excitement. I remember looking at my pile of beige sweaters, then at his glowing, high-tech monolith, and feeling that familiar cold pang of disappointment. It wasn't about the gift. It was about what the gift represented. They invested in his fun, and they invested in my utility. He was a passion project. I was a safe bet. This dynamic followed us into adulthood. I went to Oregon State, got a degree in finance, and landed a respectable job as a financial analyst at Pacific Northwest Financial Services in Portland. I was good at it, thorough, careful, always triple-checking my numbers. I found a quiet satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos of the market, in protecting my clients' money as if it were my own. My boss, Mark Renshaw, was a carbon copy of my dad. He was a big-picture guy who mistook my caution for a lack of killer instinct. He'd give the big, flashy accounts to the smooth talkers on the team, the guys who played golf with him, while I get the tedious, detail-oriented work that no one else wanted, the forensic accounting on troubled portfolios, the mind-numbing compliance checks. I was underpaid, overworked, and constantly overlooked for promotions. Tyler, meanwhile, bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. He sold crypto during the bubble and lost a significant amount of my parents' money, which they wrote off as a learning experience. He tried dropshipping cheap junk from China, filling our parents' garage with boxes of unsold phone cases. He even attempted to become a lifestyle influencer, which mostly involved my parents funding his vacations to Bali and Thailand, so he could take pictures for Instagram with captions about living your authentic life. None of it ever stuck. My parents bankrolled every single failed venture, calling it seed money for his entrepreneurial spirit. When I once cautiously suggested that maybe Tyler should take a business class or two at the local community college, my mother looked at me with deep offense. "Don't be so critical, David," she'd said, her voice sharp. "Your brother is a dreamer. We have to support his dreams." They never offered to support mine. They just expected me to be self-sufficient. My grandmother Maggie was my only refuge. She was the only one who seemed to see me. Every other weekend, I would make the 3-hour drive from Portland down to her small, cozy house in Bend. We never did anything extraordinary. I'd help her in her garden, my hands in the same soil she'd been tending for 50 years. I'd fix her leaky faucet or help her program her new television. We'd sit on her porch and drink iced tea, and she'd tell me stories about her life, though always with a certain vagueness about her youth. She was the one who encouraged my photography. For my 21st birthday, she gave me a vintage 35mm film camera, the kind I'd always wanted but could never afford. "The world looks different through a good lens, Davy," she'd said. "It helps you see what's really there." So when Mr. Harrison said I got $1, it felt like her final voice had been silenced, replaced by the familiar, dismissive chorus of my family. It felt like the universe telling me what they had been telling me all along. You are the sensible sweater, not the gaming computer. After leaving the lawyer's office that first day, I went home to my small apartment, the one I could barely afford, and just sat on my couch in a daze, the wooden box of recipe cards on my coffee table. Later that evening, I called my colleague Sarah. She wasn't just a colleague. She was my only real friend at the firm, the only one who saw past my quiet exterior and recognized the work I did. "You're kidding me," she said, her voice laced with the outrage I couldn't seem to muster for myself. $1? David, that's not just unfair, it's downright cruel. "I am so sorry. It is what it is, Sarah," I mumbled, the words tasting like defeat. "No, it's not. It's garbage. You were the one who visited her every other weekend. I remember you leaving work early on Fridays to drive down to Bend. You were the one who helped her with her garden and fixed her leaky faucet. What did Tyler ever do besides show up for holiday dinners and ask her for money?" Hearing her say it, hearing my own silent, screaming thoughts validated by someone else, made a little crack in the wall of resignation I'd built around myself. She was right. I was the one who was there. I was the one who loved Grandma for who she was, not for what she could give me. Later that night, unable to sleep, I opened the old, wooden box. It smelled like my grandmother's kitchen. A faint, comforting mix of cinnamon, vanilla, and old paper. The cards were beautiful, each one written in her elegant, looping cursive. The corners softened with age. I picked one up. It was for her famous beef stew, the kind that simmered for hours on a cold day. I smiled, remembering how she'd let me stir the big, heavy pot when I was a little boy, telling me it was the most important job. Then I saw it. In the margin, next to the ingredients list for the stew, she had written in tiny, neat letters, "The first lesson of investing, David my dear, is to invest in yourself. It always pays the best interest." I frowned, my heart skipping a beat. I picked up another card. This one was for her sourdough bread, a notoriously difficult recipe that required days of patience and careful tending. In the margin, it said, "True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in patience. The world belongs to those who can wait." I went through the whole stack, my hands starting to tremble. Every single card had a little note, a piece of advice, a life lesson disguised as a cooking tip. On the card for her spicy chili, "Sometimes, you need to take a risk to get the best results." On the one for her simple roast chicken, "Master the fundamentals and the rest will follow." They weren't just recipes. They were a journal of her entire philosophy. It was a secret conversation she'd been having with me for years, right under my nose, and I'd never even realized it. A wave of emotion washed over me so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. Love, grief, and a profound sense of connection that the will reading had tried and failed to erase. The next 3 days were a blur of work and quiet, simmering anger. My family, of course, was ecstatic. My mom sent a stream of photos to the family group chat. Tyler posing in front of the cottage, Tyler holding the keys to the Subaru, Tyler raising a glass of champagne. The final picture was of the three of them, Mom, Dad, and Tyler, toasting with the caption, "So proud of our boy. He deserves every bit of it." I muted the chat. I wanted to throw my phone against the wall. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, as I sat at my desk staring blankly at a spreadsheet, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "David Mitchell speaking." "Mr. Mitchell, this is Michael Harrison." My heart jumped into my throat. "Mr. Harrison, is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, son. In fact, it's much better than fine. I need you to come to my office as soon as you possibly can. There are additional matters in your grandmother's estate that we need to discuss. Matters that are both urgent and strictly confidential." My mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. What could it be? A mistake in the will? A forgotten savings bond? I had absolutely no idea that the foundation of my entire world was about to crack wide open. I agreed to meet him the next day, a knot of dread and a tiny, flickering flame of hope twisting in my gut. The next day, I walked into Mr. Harrison's office feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The oppressive tension was gone. There was no audience waiting for my downfall. It was just me and him, and the room felt less like a courtroom and more like a sanctuary. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, David," he said, gesturing for me to sit in the plush leather chair I had avoided just days before. "Would you like some coffee? Water?" "Water would be great. Thank you," I managed to say, my throat dry. He poured me a glass from a pitcher on his credenza and sat down opposite me, folding his hands on his desk. He looked at me with an expression of profound, weary kindness. "As I mentioned," he began, getting straight to the point, "there's more to your grandmother's will than was disclosed at the public reading. A great deal more." My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it. "What do you mean, sir?" He leaned back, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "Your grandmother, Maggie, was a remarkable woman, far more remarkable than your family ever gave her credit for. I knew her for 45 years, and she never ceased to surprise me." He paused, looking out the window for a moment as if gathering his thoughts. Back in the 1960s, before she was married, before she was a mother, she worked for the State Department. Her posting was in Geneva, Switzerland. I stared at him, dumbfounded. My grandmother? The quiet, sweet woman who grew roses in Bend, Oregon, and whose greatest joy seemed to be baking pies. I knew she traveled when she was young, but she'd always been so vague about the details, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. In Geneva, he continued, turning his gaze back to me, she wasn't just a secretary. She was an assistant to a trade attaché. She was surrounded by the world of international finance and diplomacy. And she was a sponge. She listened, she learned, and she saw how real wealth was built and protected. Not through flashy schemes or loud pronouncements, but through quiet, steady, long-term investments. She was brilliant at it, a natural. She opened her first private bank account there with a small inheritance from her own mother, a few $1,000s. He let that sink in. And for 60 years, she nurtured it. She read the Wall Street Journal like it was her Bible. She made shrewd, patient investments. She lived modestly, never drawing attention to herself, while this nest egg she had created grew, and grew, and grew. She never told a soul. Not her husband, not your father, no one. Except me. He slid a heavy, leather-bound folder across the polished table towards me. It landed with a soft, expensive thud. David, your grandmother left you that $1 in her public will for a very specific, and perhaps very painful reason. It was a test. A final test of your character. She knew your family would mock you, and she wanted to see if you would handle it with dignity. She told me once, a man's character is not defined by how he handles success, Michael, but by how he handles public humiliation. She wanted you to have a solid, unshakable sense of your own self-worth, completely separate from money, before she gave you this. He tapped the folder with his index finger. This is the real inheritance. Your grandmother established a series of Swiss bank accounts. I spoke with her primary banker in Geneva this morning. As of the market's close yesterday, the total value of the portfolio is approximately $8,212,000. The number didn't register. It was just a sound, a collection of syllables. 8 million. It was like he'd told me the distance to the moon in inches. It was an abstract concept, completely disconnected from my reality of worrying about my rent and my crippling student loan payments. And you, David, he said gently, his eyes locking onto mine, are the sole beneficiary. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I just stared at him, my mind a complete, roaring blank. He must have seen the profound shock on my face, because he pushed a small, velvet box towards me. It was the kind of box that held jewelry. Inside, there were several sealed envelopes, all addressed to me in my grandmother's familiar, elegant cursive. She wanted you to have these, he said softly. Her words will explain it better than mine ever could. I picked up the first letter, my hands trembling so badly I could barely break the seal. My dearest David, it began. If you are reading this, it means you have passed my final, perhaps slightly dramatic, test. Forgive an old woman her theatrics, but the stakes were too high for subtlety. I needed to be absolutely sure. I have watched you your entire life. I have seen your quiet strength, your deep-seated integrity, your unwavering work ethic in a world that only seems to reward the loudest voice. I saw you stay up all night to fix your brother's science project without ever asking for a word of thanks. I saw the pure, unadulterated pride on your face when you bought your first car with your own money. I saw you. In a family that often looked right through you, I always saw you. I am leaving you this fortune not as a reward, but as a tool. I chose you because you, more than anyone, understand the value of work. You know that money is not for flaunting. It's for building security, for creating opportunities, and for helping others. Your parents, bless their hearts, never understood that. They see money as a scoreboard. And your brother, I love him dearly, but giving him this kind of money would have destroyed him. It would have fueled his worst impulses and snuffed out any chance he had of finding his own worth. The cottage and the small savings are enough to give him stability, a chance to find his own way without the crushing burden of a great fortune. Use this gift wisely, my boy. Secure your own future first, but don't stop there. Find a way to use it to create something meaningful. Your heart is in the right place. Trust it. It's the most valuable compass you will ever own. Tears were streaming down my face as I finished the letter, dripping onto the expensive paper. It was a lifetime of validation, of feeling seen, packed into a few short paragraphs. Mr. Harrison gave me a moment, then pushed another, much thicker file towards me. "Your grandmother was nothing if not meticulous," he said. "This folder contains all the details about the accounts, the contact information for her bankers, but it also contains documents pertaining to other domestic arrangements. She structured everything to protect her legacy from foolishness and greed. She called it her firewall. I suggest you read it all carefully, perhaps on the plane." The word jolted me. "Plane? Where am I going?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "To Geneva," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You need to meet the bankers who handled your grandmother's portfolio. You need to stand in the vault and see it for yourself. You need to understand what you have. I've already made the arrangements. Your flight leaves tomorrow morning." I left his office in a complete daze. The world outside on the Portland streets seemed unreal. The cars, the people, the city sounds, it was all a movie I wasn't a part of. That night I couldn't sleep. I just sat on my couch with the letters and the recipe cards spread out on my coffee table, feeling the immense, terrifying weight of my grandmother's love and trust. The next day, just as I was trying to pack a bag, my mind still reeling, the storm broke. My mother called, her voice syrupy sweet, a tone that always set my teeth on edge. "David, honey, how are you?" "I'm fine, Mom." Good, good. "Listen, your father and I were just talking, and we're a little worried about you. Tyler mentioned you went back to see Mr. Harrison yesterday. Is everything okay? Did you ask him about the will?" I could hear the unspoken question hanging in the air, thick with greed. "Did you find a loophole for us?" "Everything's fine," I said, trying to keep my voice even, my heart starting to pound with a new kind of anger. "Oh, well, your father was thinking. That cottage is lovely, but it's a lot for Tyler to handle on his own. We were thinking, since you didn't really get anything of substance, perhaps you could ask Mr. Harrison if there's a way to, split the cottage. Or maybe Tyler could give you the car. It's only fair after all." The audacity of it, the sheer, shameless nerve, took my breath away. They laughed in my face as I was handed a pittance, and now they were sending me back in to beg for the scraps from my brother's plate to make it fair. The old David would have mumbled something non-committal, promised to think about it, and hung up, feeling guilty and small. But something inside me had shifted. The ink on my grandmother's letters was barely dry. Her words were a shield around me. "Trust your heart. It's the most valuable compass you will ever own." "No, Mom," I said, my voice clearer and firmer than I had ever used with her before. "I will not be doing that." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had never said a direct no to her in my entire life. "Well, I never," she finally sputtered, her sweet tone vanishing, replaced by a sharp, offended edge. "There's no need to be so selfish, David. After all we've done for you, we're just trying to look out for you." "No, you're not," I said, the truth of it liberating me. "You're looking out for Tyler. What's his is his, and what's mine is mine. I have to go, Mom." I hung up the phone before she could reply. My hand was shaking, but a strange, exhilarating sense of power surged through me. It was the first time I had ever drawn a boundary. The first time I had ever defended my own small patch of ground. They didn't know the truth, not even a fraction of it. They thought I was fighting over a used car. They had no idea I was about to fly to Switzerland to claim a legacy they couldn't even imagine. And as I finished packing my bags, I knew this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. Flying to Geneva was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Just 36 hours earlier, I had been living in a cramped Portland apartment, worrying about my car insurance payment and eating ramen for dinner. Now I was sitting in a business class seat I hadn't paid for, sipping complimentary orange juice and looking down at a blanket of clouds, the heavy legal folder Mr. Harrison had given me resting on my lap. It felt less like a real event and more like a bizarre, high-altitude dream I was about to wake up from. Every time a flight attendant addressed me as Mr. Mitchell, I had to stop myself from looking over my shoulder for my father. Geneva was exactly as you'd imagine it. Clean, orderly, and intimidatingly wealthy. The buildings were pristine, The streets were spotless, and even the air felt crisp and expensive. The bank was a formidable old-world building of gray stone, with no flashy signs, just a small, discreet brass plaque. It radiated a sense of quiet, unshakable power. I met with the Swiss banker, a woman named Petra Zimmermann, in a private office that overlooked the deep blue expanse of Lake Geneva. The room was the epitome of understated luxury. A single, stunning piece of modern art on the walls, furniture that was clearly handcrafted and probably cost more than my car. Petra was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to assess everything at once. I had expected someone cold and clinical, but she greeted me with a surprisingly warm handshake and a genuine smile. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her English perfect with a slight German-Swiss accent. "It is an honor to finally meet you. Your grandmother was one of our most esteemed clients, and, if I may say so, one of my favorite people. She was a force of nature." Over the next 2 hours, she walked me through the portfolio. She didn't just show me numbers on a page. She told me the story behind them, bringing my grandmother's secret life into vivid focus. She showed me transaction records of how Maggie had invested a small sum in a little-known tech company called Apple in the early 80s, holding on to it through all its ups and downs. How she'd bought blue-chip stocks during market downturns when everyone else was selling in a panic. How she'd held onto her investments with a steady, patient hand for decades, never chasing fads, never getting greedy. "Your grandmother wasn't a gambler, Mr. Mitchell," Petra explained, her respect for Maggie evident in her voice. "She was a student. She was a scholar of the market. She studied global trends, she understood geopolitical risk, and she never, ever made a decision based on emotion or popular opinion. She was a financial artist." She told me a story that made me smile. In the 1970s, during a meeting, a pompous male banker had tried to condescend to her, advising her to put her money into something safer, more suitable for a lady, like government bonds. Maggie had listened patiently, nodding, and when he was finished, she proceeded to grill him with questions so sharp and insightful about currency fluctuations and emerging market debt that he was left speechless and red-faced. "He never made that mistake again," Petra concluded with a wry smile. Hearing these stories, I felt like I was meeting my grandmother for the first time. This wasn't just Maggie who baked pies and wore cardigans. This was Margaret, the financial powerhouse, the brilliant, self-made woman who had built an empire in secret, all while living a quiet life in a small town in Oregon. She had worn her modesty like a disguise. That night, back in my ridiculously luxurious hotel room, a room I felt I had no right to be in, I finally opened the thick legal folder Mr. Harrison had given me. My mind was buzzing from everything I'd learned from Petra. The first section detailed the Swiss accounts, but the second, much thicker section was titled Domestic Assets and the Mitchell Family Trust. I started reading and my blood ran cold. The legal language was dense, a thicket of clauses and subclauses, but the meaning was terrifyingly, brutally clear. Years ago, my grandmother had used a portion of her wealth to quietly purchase the very house my parents lived in. They thought they'd paid off their mortgage to the bank. In reality, a holding company controlled by Maggie had bought the debt, and she had become their silent, unknown landlord. She had also been the silent owner of the mortgage on my father's small manufacturing business, the one he lorded over like a king. And all of it, the house, the business, the Bend cottage that she had just gifted to Tyler, and a portfolio of other stocks and bonds in the U.S., had been placed into something called an irrevocable trust. A trust, as I vaguely knew from my finance classes, is a legal entity that holds assets. And a trust is controlled by a trustee, who has a legal duty to manage it. My eyes scanned the page, my breath catching in my throat, searching for the key clause, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. And then I found it, printed in the same stark, black ink as the rest, but it seemed to leap off the page. Upon my passing, the position of sole acting trustee for the Mitchell Family Trust, with all its attendant powers and responsibilities, shall pass without delay to my elder grandson, David Mitchell, should he accept the charge. I had to read it 3 times, then a 4th, before the full implication sank in. It wasn't just the $8 million in a Swiss vault. It was everything. The house my parents lived in, the house they thought was the bedrock of their lives, was now under my control. The cottage Tyler was probably throwing a party in at that very moment legally belonged to a trust that I, and only I, managed. My father's business, his entire identity, was financially beholden to me. My grandmother hadn't just left me money. She had left me the entire kingdom, the keys to every door. I leaned back against the headboard, the papers sliding from my nerveless fingers onto the floor. I felt dizzy, a wave of vertigo washing over me. This wasn't a gift. It was a weapon. It was a staggering, terrifying amount of power and responsibility, and I didn't want it. The old David, the one who tried to make himself small, would have run from this. He would have called Mr. Harrison and begged him to find a way out, to refuse the charge. But as I sat there in that silent, opulent hotel room, I thought about my family's laughter echoing in the lawyer's office. I thought about a lifetime of being made to feel worthless, of being the sensible sweater while my brother was the main event. And I thought about my grandmother's faith in me, the faith of the brilliant woman Petra had described. She hadn't given me this power to be cruel. She had given it to me to restore balance, to protect her legacy from the very people who were supposed to cherish it, and to finally force my family to see me for who I really was. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but underneath it, something else was growing. Resolve. The boy who fixed his brother's volcano was gone. The man who was about to fly home held all the cards. And I knew, with a terrifying, absolute certainty, that I was going to play them. When I got back to Portland, I didn't call my family. I let them stew. I spent 2 days meeting with Mr. Harrison, going over every line of the trust document, making sure I understood the full extent of my power and, more importantly, my responsibilities. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was now overlaid with a diamond-hard layer of clarity. On the third day, I made the call. Not to my mom, but to my dad. "Dad," I said, my voice calm and even, "I need to have a family meeting. Tonight. At your house. 7 o'clock. There was a pause. "A meeting? What for?" he grumbled. "It's important. It concerns the entire family. Be there." I didn't ask, I told him. Then I hung up before he could argue. When I walked into their house that night, the ambush was already set. They were all there in the living room, my father, my mother, and Tyler. They looked like a tribunal, ready to pass judgment. "All right, David," my father started, crossing his arms. "You called this meeting. What's so important that you have to be so mysterious about it?" My mother jumped in, her voice dripping with false concern. "Your father and I are very worried about you, honey. Ever since the will reading, you've been so distant. And that trip you took. We think you're being taken advantage of by that lawyer." Tyler snorted from the armchair where he was lounging. "Yeah, what's this about? You trying to contest the will to get a piece of my cottage? It's not gonna happen, dude." I let them talk. I let them get it all out, all the accusations, all the fake sympathy, all the condescension. I just stood there, listening, letting their words wash over me without touching me. The old me would have been flustered, defensive, trying to explain myself. But the man who had read those trust documents just felt a profound sense of calm. They had no idea what game they were even playing. When they finally wound down, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I simply walked over to the coffee table and placed one of my grandmother's recipe cards on it. It was the one for her apple pie. "Mom," I said, my voice quiet, "do you remember the Saturday you and Grandma taught me how to make this?" I was 10. I kept messing up the lattice on the crust. My mother blinked, thrown off balance. "What? Yes, I suppose I remember. What does that have to do with anything?" "Grandma didn't get mad," I continued, looking at her directly. She just smiled and said, "It's okay, Davy. The first try is for learning. The second is for getting it right." She said it was true for pie crusts and it was true for life. The room was silent. This wasn't the argument they had prepared for. They didn't know how to respond to a memory. "Grandma taught me about patience," I said, my voice gaining strength. "She taught me about hard work. She taught me about dignity. She left me those cards because she knew I understood the lessons she was teaching. The dollar was a symbol that true value isn't something you're given. It's something you earn. My father scoffed. Oh, please, spare us the greeting card philosophy. It's about money, David. You're just mad you got cut out. You're right, I said, looking him dead in the eye. It is about money. It's about the house you're standing in. It's about the cottage Tyler is getting ready to sell for party money. And it's about the business you've run for 30 years. Confusion flickered across their faces. I knew this would be difficult to understand, I said calmly, which is why I'm not the only one you'll be hearing from tonight. And right on cue, the doorbell rang. My mother, looking flustered, went to open it. Mr. Harrison stood on the doorstep, holding his briefcase. Good evening, everyone, he said, stepping inside with an air of quiet authority. My family stared at him, mouths agape. I had orchestrated this. I was in control. What is the meaning of this? My father demanded, his face turning red. Mr. Harrison didn't address him. He looked at me and I gave him a slight nod. As David was saying, the lawyer began, opening his briefcase on the dining room table. This is about the full extent of Margaret's estate planning. The will you heard read was only one small part of it. The most significant part of her legacy was the establishment of the Mitchell Family Trust. He laid out a document on the table. This trust is the legal owner of this house, the cottage in Bend, and holds significant financial leverage over Mr. Mitchell Sr.'s business. The color drained from my father's face. Tyler finally sat up straight, his smirk gone, replaced by a look of dawning horror. And, Mr. Harrison said, delivering the final blow, his voice clear and precise, as of the moment of her death, Margaret's chosen successor as sole acting trustee of this entire entity is David Mitchell. He let the words hang in the dead, silent air. He controls it all, the lawyer stated simply. I looked at my family. My brother, the golden boy, looked like he was going to be sick. My father, the patriarch, the king of his little castle, looked like he had been struck by lightning. And my mother, the master manipulator, had a look on her face I had never seen before. It wasn't pity. It wasn't anger. It was pure, unadulterated shock. For the first time in my life, she had no words, no scheme, no way to spin this. The power in the room had shifted. It had shifted completely and irrevocably. The laughter had stopped. And in the ringing silence, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that followed Mr. Harrison's announcement was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't an empty silence. It was filled with the shattering of 1,000 assumptions, of a lifetime of a carefully constructed family hierarchy turning to dust. Then, the explosion. That's impossible, my father roared, his face a mottled shade of purple. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You manipulated her. An old woman on her deathbed. This is fraud. We'll sue. We'll take you to court and we'll get what's rightfully ours. Mr. Harrison didn't even flinch. I assure you, Mr. Mitchell, he said in a tone as dry as old paper. The trust is ironclad. Your wife is a signatory witness on several of the key documents. Margaret was of perfectly sound mind and body when she established the structure over a decade ago. Any legal challenge would be a waste of your time and, more pointedly, the trust's money. My father's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He looked at my mother, who was pale as a ghost. She stared at the documents on the table as if they were snakes. Then it was Tyler's turn. He jumped up from his chair, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and panic. My cottage. She gave me my cottage. You can't take it from me, he yelled, his voice cracking. I'm not taking it from you, Tyler, I said, my voice steady. It was the first time I'd spoken. Grandma did give it to you, but she gave it to you as part of a legacy that she entrusted me to protect. It's not a toy to be broken or sold. It's a responsibility. That was when my mother finally found her voice. The master manipulator fell back on her most trusted weapon. Tears. Her eyes welled up, and her lower lip began to tremble. David, she whispered, walking towards me, her hands outstretched. How could you do this to us? To your family? After everything we've done for you, we love you. We just want what's best for everyone. The old me would have crumbled. The guilt would have washed over me, and I would have started backtracking, apologizing, trying to smooth things over. But I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the tears not as a sign of sadness, but as a tactic. A last, desperate move in a game she had just lost. I didn't step back, but I didn't step forward either. You love me, Mom? I asked, my voice devoid of accusation. Just a simple, honest question. Was it love when you laughed at me in the lawyer's office? Was it love when you called me, asking me to give up my dignity to make things fair for Tyler? Or do you just love what you thought I could be controlled into doing? She flinched as if I'd struck her. She had no answer. I turned to all of them. This ends now, I said, and my voice had a weight to it that even I didn't recognize. The dynamic of this family, the one where I am the afterthought and Tyler is the priority, is over. This is not about revenge. This is about restoring the balance that Grandma intended. I laid out the new rules. They were simple, but for them they were earth-shattering. You can continue to live in this house, Dad, Mom. You can continue to run your business, Dad. But from this day forward, you are tenants and I am the landlord. The trust will cover the basic expenses, but the days of lavish spending are over. There will be a budget. There will be accountability. Every major financial decision, personal or professional, goes through me. My father looked like he was going to have a stroke. My mother just stared at the floor. Then I looked at Tyler. The cottage is yours to use, I said. But you will not sell it. You will not mortgage it. You will pay the property taxes and the upkeep from your own pocket. If you can't, you will let me know, and the trust will take over direct management. You have 1 year, Tyler. 1 year to find a purpose for it, to treat it like the gift it is. If after a year you're still just using it as a party pad, we will have another conversation. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as I stood there, watching the power drain from their faces, I didn't feel cruel. I felt right. I felt like I was finally honoring the woman who had seen the strength in me all along. A few days later, after the dust had settled into a thick, resentful silence, I went to see Tyler. I found him at the cottage, which he'd driven to in a sullen funk. He was sitting on the porch, surrounded by empty beer bottles, looking out at the lake. He didn't look at me as I walked up. "Come to gloat," he muttered. I sat down in the chair next to him. I didn't say anything for a long time. We just listened to the sound of the wind in the pines. "No," I finally said. "I didn't come to gloat." I took a deep breath. "Do you know what I was most jealous of my whole life?" I asked. He shot me a look of disbelief. "Jealous? Of me? I'm the one who should be jealous. You just inherited $8 million and our entire family. I was jealous that things were so easy for you," I said quietly. "Not the money, not the cars. I was jealous that Mom and Dad never expected anything from you. They just loved you for showing up. They always expected me to achieve, to be responsible, to earn my place. You never had to." I looked at him, and I think that was the worst thing they ever did to you, Tyler. They never gave you a chance to feel the pride of building something yourself. They never let you fail and get back up on your own. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. No one had ever spoken to him like this before. "Grandma didn't give you this cottage to be a handout," I said, standing up. "She gave you this cottage because she believed you could be more than what Mom and Dad coddled you into being. She gave you a chance. So am I." I started to walk away. "So what?" he called out, his voice raw. "What am I supposed to do?" I stopped and turned back. "That's up to you," I said. "For the first time in your life, it's completely up to you." As I drove away, leaving him alone on that porch, I didn't know if he would succeed or fail. But I knew for the first time he had been given something more valuable than money. He had been given a choice. And in its own way, so had I. The first 6 months were the hardest. I resigned from my job at Pacific Northwest Financial Services. My boss, Mark, was smug about it. "Big mistake, Mitchell," he'd said. The real world is tough. You'll be back. The satisfaction of knowing I never would be was immense. I used a small portion of the Swiss funds to start my own firm, Mitchell Financial Planning. My mission was simple, inspired by my grandmother. I wanted to provide honest, accessible financial advice to people who were often overlooked by the big firms, women, minorities, small business owners. People like my grandmother before she became a secret millionaire. It was a struggle. I rented a small, cramped office downtown. I was the CEO, the analyst, the marketing department, and the janitor. There were days I was so overwhelmed by running a business and managing the trust, which mostly involved fielding angry, manipulative phone calls from my parents, that I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. The trust wasn't a simple piggy bank. It was a complex web of legal and moral obligations. Learning to say no to my family over and over was exhausting. It was a muscle I'd never been allowed to develop, and now I had to use it daily. They tested every boundary, tried every angle, but I held firm, thinking of what Grandma would have done. My first real client was a woman named Maria. She owned a small, successful bakery but had no retirement savings and was terrified of debt. She was skeptical of me, a young guy in a new office. But I didn't talk down to her. I listened. I used what Grandma had taught me about patience and steady growth. I helped her create a plan. That small success felt bigger than any deal I had ever worked on at my old firm. About a year and a half after the will reading, things began to truly change. My firm was growing. I had hired 2 other advisors to help with the workload. I partnered with a local women's business development center, run by a sharp, passionate woman named Isabella Rossi, to offer free financial planning workshops. I was working harder than I ever had in my life, but for the first time it felt meaningful. It was mine. One day, I got an unexpected email from Tyler. It wasn't whiny or demanding. It was just a link to a local newspaper article. The headline read, "Bend Cottage becomes hub for sustainable living workshops." The article described how Tyler Mitchell had transformed his grandmother's old property into a thriving little enterprise. He was teaching people how to grow their own food, how to compost, how to live a little more simply. There was a picture of him, dirt under his fingernails, a genuine, proud smile on his face. He looked happy. He looked like he had a purpose. A few weeks later, I drove down to visit my parents. Our relationship was still strained, filled with long, awkward silences. But the angry phone calls had stopped. They were living within the budget I'd set. The fear in their eyes had been replaced by a grudging, resentful respect. They didn't like the new reality, but they had accepted it. That evening, as I was about to leave, my mother stopped me at the door. "David," she said, not looking at me, "your grandmother. She was right about you." It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was the closest I knew I would ever get. She finally met my eyes. "I was always so afraid," she whispered. "I grew up with nothing. I was so terrified of going back to that. I thought if I just pushed all my hopes onto Tyler, the charming one, he would succeed and keep us all safe. I was wrong. I smothered him, and I ignored you because you were quiet and capable, and I took your strength for granted." I didn't know what to say. For years, I had dreamed of a moment like this, an admission of the truth. But hearing it now, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a deep, aching sadness for the years we had all lost. "I know," I said quietly, "but we can't go back, Mom. We can only move forward. And we have to do it differently now." She nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. It wasn't a performance. It was real. As I drove home, I realized the trust wasn't the only thing Grandma had left me. She had left me the chance to rebuild my family, not on the broken foundation of lies and favoritism, but on the new, solid ground of truth and accountability. It was a much harder, much messier inheritance than the money, but I was starting to understand that it was also the most valuable. 2 years have passed since that day in the lawyer's office. My firm now serves over 300 clients across Oregon and Washington. We're helping people build their own legacies, one sound investment at a time. It's the most fulfilling work I could ever imagine. My relationship with my family is a work in progress. It's not perfect. It may never be. The scars are deep, but it's real. My parents are quieter now, more thoughtful. They live more simply. For the first time, they've started talking about the future with prudence instead of entitlement. But the biggest change is Tyler. Last week, he drove up to Portland to meet me. Not to ask for money, but to propose a business plan. He wants to expand his workshop business, creating a subscription box for organic seeds and gardening tools. He'd done his research, run the numbers, and created a solid proposal. He was asking the trust for a small business loan. We sat in my office, the one that overlooks the city, and we went over his spreadsheet. We weren't the golden boy and the shadow anymore. We were just two brothers working together. Two men trying to build something. As he left, he turned to me. "You know," he said, "for a while there I hated you. I thought you'd stolen my life. But you didn't. You just made me finally start living it." I thought about that after he left. My grandmother's inheritance wasn't the $8 million. It wasn't the power or the houses or the trust. That was all just the tool. The real inheritance was the opportunity she gave me, the chance to break a toxic cycle, to redefine my own worth, and to give my family a chance to do the same. The true wealth she left me wasn't in a Swiss vault. It was in the quiet pride of meaningful work. It was in the newfound respect in my brother's eyes. It was in the strength I found to build a life and a family on a foundation of honesty. That's a fortune no one can ever take away. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely overlooked, only to find a strength you never knew you had? I'd be genuinely interested to hear about it. Please, share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.